Hello, this is the National Council for Preservation Education's fourth webinar of this summer, the last in a series we're hosting to introduce the federal historic preservation programs. The title of the webinar is An Introduction to National NAGPRA and the Tribal Preservation Program. I'm Julie Johnson, the co-director of the National Council's Internship Program. The audience for this series includes interns, and I want to especially welcome any of our NCPE interns, but also fellows, scholars, volunteer staff, and anyone else interested in this educational series. I'm delighted you're here and look forward to your questions. The webinar is offered in collaboration with the National Park Service Cultural Resources, Partnerships, and Science Directorate in Washington, D.C. And I'm joined today by Professor Michael Tomlin, the director of NCPE's internship program and member of the executive committee. Michael will help me monitor the chat room and field your questions and hopefully help me with some technical difficulties we're having today. Before I introduce our panelists and my co-host, Paloma Blasny from NPS, I'd like to say a few words about NCPE and our internship program. The National Council is a nonprofit national organization whose members are educational institutions that offer degrees in historic preservation, heritage conservation, and cultural resource management. There are about 60 institutional members from colleges, universities, and training centers all over the United States. In the past year and a half, NCPE has signed agreements with the National Park Service to place interns at almost 50 sites and offices, including at national parks, national historical parks, national monuments, national military parks, national recreation areas, and more. Our NCPE interns have worked as cultural anthropologists at a busy park like Yosemite in California, done preservation documentation and conservation work at Antietam National Battlefield in Maryland, researched and compiled data on museum collections held by the Bureau of Land Management at one of their affiliated museums, such as the Maxwell in Albuquerque, and worked as a videographer for the Olmsted Center for Landscape Preservation in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states. Since 1992, when NCPE's internship program was established, almost 6,000 students and recent graduates have been placed at mostly National Park Service sites to learn from and contribute to the work done by skilled professionals. In many instances, this work experience has led to employment with the Park Service. And I'm very proud to say that some of the speakers in this summer's webinar series have been NCPE internship alums. The internship program receives between about 400 and 500 applications from students and recent graduates each year to fill approximately 175 positions. It's a competitive award, and successful candidates will be those applicants who can best explain how their coursework and their work experience, volunteer experience, best matches the positions they're applying to. And I encourage anyone who's listening, who's a student, undergraduate or graduate, or a recent graduate, to apply for an internship. Our next round will be coming up in the fall for next year. For those of you who are familiar with our application process through PreserveNet, it's currently being upgraded and will migrate to a new website this fall. The new URL is preservenet.org. And I hope to have the new site online in time for the academic year application round in October or so. These are for the positions that will start early in 2021, we hope, COVID notwithstanding. PreserveNet will continue, of course, to have the jobs board that it always has, links to resources and publications, as well as a section on degree programs in historic preservation and information on scholarships and fellowships. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to welcome Paloma Blasny, the Youth Programs Coordinator at NPS's Cultural Resources Office of Interpretation and Education in Washington, D.C. Paloma is responsible for putting together today's speakers. Paloma, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about the topic?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Julie. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to emphasize something Julie said in that this is a NCPE hosted webinar, but everyone is welcome, all interns. We have interns from various programs from across the country, so thank you for joining us. Thank you to our speakers today for your time. We really appreciate your time today in speaking with us. And I want to thank Julie for all her coordinating efforts. It takes a lot of technology to get this working. So thank you so much for making this happen and for moderating. And thank you, Michael, for moderating as well. This is our fourth in a series of webinars this summer. Sponsored by NCPE, and we have 3 speakers today. There will be time for questions, so please think of questions. Questions are encouraged. Please type them in the chat, the speakers' email addresses will be shown at the end, so you are more than welcome to email them as well. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions about NCPE and your internship or any other internship topics with the Park Service. I'm happy to chat with you about internships. And lastly, I just want you to enjoy this webinar. I hope you ask some great questions. And thank you, Julie.
I am happy to be involved in this process. I really appreciate, Paloma, the fact that you've reached out, contacted our speakers, arranged them all, assembling the topics on what is a large federal program and making sense of it. It's been truly a collaborative effort to put it together, and I really appreciate the partnership in this and in so much else. We have 3 speakers today. And as Paloma said, there's time for Q&A after each one. Use the chat room to pose your questions so I can relay them to our speakers. And if there's time, we can answer more at the end. Starting with that, I will introduce our first speaker, Sarah Glass, as Sarah takes over the screen from me. Hopefully, Sarah can manage that. While I am introducing her, Sarah Glass serves as the Notices and Grants Coordinator for the National NAGPRA Program within the Cultural Resources Directorate of the National Park Service. Prior to NPS, Sarah worked as a Museum Program Specialist at the Institute of Museum and Library Services and as a Curatorial Fellow at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. She has held a variety of other roles at institutions such as the National Geographic Museum, Tudor Place Historic House, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and the Smithsonian's Traveling Exhibition Services. Sarah has an MA in Museum Studies from the George Washington University, where she specialized in cultural property issues, and a BA in Social Anthropology and Archaeology from Harvard University. And it looks like you're ready to go, Sarah.
Thank you, Julie. Can everyone hear? Can you hear me okay, Julie? I switched my microphone.
Yes, I can hear you, and I think if I can hear you, everyone else can hear you.
Great.
Hope so.
All right, well, thank you for that. I just want to say hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm speaking to you right now from beautiful Door County, Wisconsin, actually. I came out here because I decided I didn't want to be cooped up in my tiny DC apartment for the summer under COVID. So luckily I have a little bit of outdoor space here. But so I want to first acknowledge the tribal land and the historic tribal communities that are originally from this area, including my own, some of my own ancestors, the Huron tribe, or today that we're called the Wyandot Nation. I'm part of enrolled member of the Wyandot Nation of Kansas, so just want to give a little shout out there. I'd also like to give a shout out to you, Julie, and of course Paloma for having us and giving us this chance to speak to everybody today. I feel a little bit like a disconnected voice here. I'm used to doing this in person or at least having a video these days. So, but I hope I can get everything across just as I am. Oh, sorry, I've got last year's date on my presentation. I promise I updated some stuff, but. Anyway, moving on. So Julie already introduced me, but yep, this is just a little bit about my background to kind of give everyone a sense of how I ended up where I am today with the National NAGPRA program. I've been with the program for just over 4 years, and I'm very lucky that I was able to get my foot in the door at a previous job through the USA job system and into the federal world. But before that, I was bouncing around at multiple internships and different temporary type jobs. And I wish I had known about the NCPE internship. I would have definitely applied for it. It's right up my alley, but here we are. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, both how I got into this work, if that's interesting to anybody, but for now I'm just going to give a quick and dirty overview of what National NAGPRA is and what I do there. So hopefully most of you out there are familiar with NAGPRA. It's the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. It was passed back on November 16th, 1990, after decades, actually, decades of you could even say centuries, but decades of civil rights movement and Native American protesting and requesting that this imbalance in our country be addressed. So NAGPRA was pretty radical legislation at the time, which is hard to believe now, actually, that it took until 1990 for this law to pass, but it is pretty unique and forward-thinking in a lot of ways. And as you can see, it resolves, it's a process that was spelled out to help resolve the rights to certain types of Native American items, as well as human remains. And so it's got rights and responsibilities under the law, and it requires museums and federal agencies to fulfill that process to lead towards repatriation or transfer of control to Native American lineal descendants, the tribes themselves, and Native Hawaiian organizations. So as I touched on, NAGPRA is really interesting because it's kind of this amalgam, molding of different areas of law. There's property law involved as far as, you know, these items, these property that museums considered or federal agencies considered their property. There's Indian law, obviously. This was considered human rights law because it was addressing an inequity in civil rights. And then administrative law in the sense that it spells out an administrative process. And that's really a lot of what the National NAGPRA program does, is focus on that administrative side to help, like I said, to help our constituents through the process. So this is one of our favorite quotes of Representative Udall back when, right before NAGPRA was passed, describing this movement to address this issue, that in the larger scope of history it may be a small thing, but in the smaller scope of conscience it may be the biggest thing we've ever done. And I like to remember that and kind of hold on to that as we do our work. You know, we're based in the main interior building in downtown Washington, D.C. So often I feel a little bit kind of disconnected or separate from the actual work that's going on all over the country, and you know, in Indian country and in museums, big and small, universities, other federal agencies. We're, you know, I'm sitting in an office usually pushing papers around, but the bigger purpose or bigger mission of what we do is helps keep a good perspective on things. So these are the 5 major provisions under NAGPRA, basically the kind of 5 buckets that National NAGPRA oversees. And I know Mary will touch a little bit more on what Park NAGPRA does, and we can both talk about how Park NAGPRA is different from National NAGPRA. But basically these are the areas we oversee. And I've starred the 2 that you could probably tell from my title as Notices and Grants Coordinator that fall under kind of my purview. So we have to oversee and publish the compliance documents for museums and federal agencies. So under NAGPRA, they're required to inventory their collections and actually submit those inventories and summaries to the National NAGPRA program. So we maintain all the federal records of those. We also publish public notices in what's called the Federal Register to give due process and public notice when decisions are made under NAGPRA. We staff and support a review committee who are tasked with monitoring the overall NAGPRA process, hear disputes and requests, and report to Congress on our behalf. We monitor and oversee 2 grant programs to tribes, Native Hawaiian organizations, and museums to help them, have the funding and the resources to do their NAGPRA work and fund, consultation travel and supplies, repackaging supplies for collections and reburial ceremonies and things like that. We also are tasked with enforcing the law, so there are civil penalties that are established under NAGPRA to help enforce museums' compliance. And also, NAGPRA established the crime of illegal trafficking of Native American human remains and certain types of objects. And so we play a little bit of a role in that. Although we like to say we're not the NAGPRA police, we are the NAGPRA help desk. So especially my role as the person that gives out the federal grant money, I say I get to have the fun job. I get to be the good cop. So I would encourage anyone that's interested in NAGPRA to check out our website. It's nps.gov/NAGPRA. It's actually been updated from the screenshots I have here. It's much nicer looking now, but we have all sorts of information. We've got training videos, we've got recorded webinars on our YouTube channel, and if you are interested in NAGPRA and you haven't yet, I would recommend just starting out by reading the law itself. Because as I've said before, it's a process. So if you read it, you kind of get a good sense of exactly what it tasked museums with doing. And it seems daunting maybe to some who don't have law backgrounds to sit down and read legislation and regulations. But at the end of the day, if I can do it, I think anybody can. I'm not a lawyer, even though I considered going to law school for a while, but jumped on the museum studies track instead because I thought that sounded like more fun. So, and that's my contact information, our general information, but I know that Paloma said they'd be sharing it as well, and I'm always happy to respond to questions or have chats outside of this forum as well. So I just wanted to give a quick overview of who we are and what we do, and give everybody lots of time to present and ask questions. So that's me. Thanks.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. I do have a question, a couple of questions here. Can you give us an example of the sort of grants that you're responsible for administering and distributing? To do what, for whom,
Sure.
that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm so glad you asked. That's what I like to talk about. So I'd say probably at this point, maybe 75% of my job day to day is overseeing our grant programs, just because those require a lot of there's a lot of different sets of federal regulations and rules and DOI policies, National Park Service policies that go along with administering federal money, right? Because it's taxpayer money, we have a lot of responsibilities to oversee those funds and to make sure that everybody's checking all the right boxes and doing all the right things with that taxpayer money. So we administer, I'd say about 100 grants. I have about 100 open grants at any given time. And we have 2 grant programs, as I mentioned. There's consultation documentation grants, which are competitive grants. So people apply and they go through a review process and are weighed against certain criteria. And those, as they, just like they sound, are intended to fund activities that are involving NAGPRA specific consultation or collections documentation. So like I said, travel to and from for tribes to come to museums or museum representatives to go to tribes occasionally to do that in-person consultation that is such a critical and central part of the NAGPRA process. A lot of museums these days are going back and looking at their inventories that were done back in 1990, 1994, 95 when they were originally due after NAGPRA was passed. And they're looking at them and they're thinking, well, we've found a lot more things since then. I mean, we've digitized since then. We didn't maybe open every single box back in the 90s. So there's a lot of ongoing and active NAGPRA documentation and work right now, collections reviews being done, especially all those really big university anthropology museums and things like that, and federal agencies as well. So that takes time and money and staff, so we can help provide funds for that. Rehousing, human remains in appropriate storage or preparing them for reburial is something we get a lot of requests for. So that's those are competitive. They're project-based, so it's not really ongoing work. It's specific projects that museums or tribes put forward to request funding. And the other program is repatriation grants. So those are actually not competitive. We have a chunk of money that if it's an eligible project and a complete application and we've been funded, because our funding is dependent on Congress annually to pass a budget and allocate those funds. As long as we have money, we can give out grants to help with that very final stage in the process of transferring control and physically returning either human remains or sacred or cultural patrimony items. So that can also be transportation. Let's say if a tribe wants to drive to a museum to pick up whatever they may be and drive them back. Reburial ceremony costs, as I've said, there's often food involved. Even the time it takes to help excavate to rebury those remains. So really it's for the last stage, that transfer, the physical transfer of possession. So yeah, those are the fun, it's great that we have this. It's a small amount of money compared to a lot of other grant programs and other agencies. It's a drop in the bucket compared to something like Department of Defense, but the tribes and museums really, I'm always amazed at how far they can make that money go and just how big of a part that can play across the country in helping this work move forward.
Excellent. I have a few more questions if we have time for them. So
okay, I'll go quick.
I'll shoot this one from Perry. For places that are protected by multiple federal and state agencies, thinking especially of the Chesapeake region in Maryland, with places that are overseen by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, NPS, Fish and Wildlife, are there different regulations for each agency to comply with NAGPRA, or does NAGPRA apply the same regulations to all agencies?
That's such a good question. So NAGPRA, the land provisions of NAGPRA are a little bit different, and it's actually one of the areas people have said where it takes away a little bit of NAGPRA's strength, some people think. But it's clear to point out that NAGPRA applies only to federal and tribal lands. So NAGPRA, the land provisions apply only to that land that is controlled by the feds or on a tribal reservation. So different states have a lot of different laws when it comes to burials or discovery of human remains and things. So we often are counseling people that they need to check with their own state historic preservation office or their tribal historic preservation office. But yeah, if anyone is walking out on federal or tribal land and discovers something, then NAGPRA applies. So private land is unfortunately, is not covered.
Or state land.
Right.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Or state land.
Okay.
But there are many other laws that may actually do apply to those other lands.
One of our interns, Violet, who's at the Hawaiian Park, one of the Hawaiian parks, and asked about the overlap between NAGPRA and Native Hawaiian cultural protections. And maybe this goes back to federal NAGPRA versus state of Hawaii protections. Do you have any information about that, or is that a question or to be answered by another speaker?
Well, no, I mean, so Native Hawaiians are protected under NAGPRA in the sense that I say Native Hawaiian organizations, and those are specifically defined in the law as to what constitutes a quote Native Hawaiian organization. But no, as far as being included as with the definitions of the types of objects, so sacred objects or objects of cultural patrimony, we've had a lot of repatriations of Hawaiian ancestors and cultural items. As far as the land question goes, it's the same for if it's federal land in Hawaii. But yeah, Hawaii and Alaska are two fun states because they can be a little more complicated. But yes, Native Hawaiians are protected in a sense in the collections side of NAGPRA.
Another one, what's an example of a typical dispute that NAGPRA might resolve?
Oh, I'm loving these questions.
Yes.
Great job. Luckily, we don't get a lot of disputes. That's really kind of the last stage, hopefully, of if the review committee has to hear a dispute. But it's also a good thing that we have a review committee and we have this process in place for museums and tribes to work it out, hopefully, and not have to resort to litigation, which is definitely the last thing most people want. There's different natures of disputes. There could be, let's say, multiple lineal descendants that are each claiming that they are the most direct lineal descendant, and they are claiming the same items. The same could go for different tribes that both believe that they are the most culturally affiliated to either a set of remains or a sacred object or object of cultural patrimony. NAGPRA is set up so that it's ultimately the museum or federal agency that's in possession of these ancestors and items that has to be the decision maker. So that kind of puts the responsibility and burden on them, but also you could see it as it puts the power in their hands because they can make the call based on the information they have available. And if they make the call and the tribe or lineal descendant or Native Hawaiian organization doesn't agree with it, that's probably most often what we see as far as disputes, where there's a museum that has made a determination under NAGPRA, and unfortunately, occasionally, it's pretty rare, but occasionally we get to that point where the tribes, they've just do not agree with that determination.
Okay, one last quick question, and then we're going to stop and go on to our next speaker is from Taylor. Does MPS play any role in preventing and or facilitating return of illegally trafficked cultural resources artifacts?
That's a great question. I love all these. So, and this is going to help me set up Mary a little bit too, because as I mentioned earlier, the National NAGPRA program and Park NAGPRA have kind of different roles. So we're a little bit of a black sheep program, I say, because National NAGPRA, as I've mentioned, we're tasked with overseeing this law across the country on any institution that is defined as a museum under NAGPRA, meaning it has received federal funds and it has Native American collections, as well as federal agencies, since they obviously receive federal funds. So any federal agency that has Native American collections. It's a bit of a conflict of interest for us to oversee implementation of a law on ourselves, right? So that is why Park NAGPRA exists, and Mary will talk all about that, but Park NAGPRA is responsible for overseeing and carrying out the responsibilities of NAGPRA on behalf of the National Park Service. So although I work for the Park Service, I actually do not work with parks at all. I give them Mary's number when they call me. But yes, we do, from a national standpoint, we do work with aiding repatriation and returns, mostly in the administrative process. Like I mentioned, museums have to publish a notice before they can transfer control. They have to consult before they can do these things. So we assist museums and tribes in every step of the way up to that repatriation process. And I've been lucky enough to attend some repatriations in person. But as far as overseeing return of items from Park Service lands or other federal lands, it's really up for us. It's more about that administrative paperwork process to make sure everything gets through so things can be returned. But I know the national parks, I mean, they publish the notices come through our office. So I think that's a great setup for Mary to talk about what she does.
Yeah, and with that, thank you so much, Sarah. That was a really great overview.
Sure.
Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Sure. And our next speaker is Mary.